have taught Hebrew along with Latin.
Well, my pronunciation will be kind of ish.
Like we would know.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah, I can make something up. Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. The light audience is probably because Mary's not here.
It's always really interesting how many people I hear talk about, ooh, we gotta have a group about this, we gotta have a Bible study or whatever. We do these things.
Yeah.
Pay for them on Sundays.
Well, I think it's because the keynote speaker isn't here. You know, it's like in school when you got the substitute.
You're the substitute.
Yeah, I'm the substitute. There we go. See how this works.
That's the question.
Ooh. Let's try this again. There. Back. Nope.
I can't read that fast.
No, I was just trying to figure out how to advance and go back.
Swipe, oh, you've got the other screen. I don't use that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the only way I can go back is to go to the menu. Yeah, do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Mark Kelly, substituting for Mary. Mary's produced these slides for us, and I'll take you through them as best as I can. Before I start, I'd like to sort of catch up people who may be on the Zoom call, or some of you that haven't been here last week, about where we left off. First, for the first 2 weeks here, the rich and detailed story of David is more for adult audience. Remember her talking about that? She would often joke about how she produced this for Sunday school and how she had to clean it up a little bit. Yeah, I have to agree that in looking at the slides and listening to the presentation, it seemed more like Game of Thrones than Old Testament stuff. and some of them are pretty explicit. And when in her closing remarks last time, she was asking, well, why would we go through this? Because when Father Gary's homily today about Luke, yeah, I agree that is like chock-a-block full of all these parables, meaningful things we can put into use today in our own lives. But this stuff, it's hard to relate this to modern terms. So we're going to stop every once in a while and try to do that a little bit. But I know that there might be some struggle trying to relate what's going on with David to what could be going on in our own political space or what's happening in the modern world. The other thing is that she mentioned was that when all this was occurring, this was 3,000, 10,000 BC, all these centuries of history. And there wasn't a lot of written manuals for kings. You remember her making that point that most of the kings came or were coronated when they were very young and they were adolescent. And so they really didn't have any teaching other than, maybe there was an elder or something that helped them through that. So the story that we're reading in the Old Testament about David also provides a roadmap for future governing leaders, whether it's of a city or a whole nation. Right. So as far as the plot, we left off at Abner's death at the gate of Hebron at the hands of Joab. And just to refresh you, Abner was King Saul's cousin and also commander-in-chief of his army. And David mourns his death to show he had no complicity. And then I think there was some discussion about why was the story written this way? Why was he mourning the death? And then there was some skepticism about some Bible scholars about whether it was really benefiting David, Abner's death was benefiting David or not. So it seems like if David was trying to form a coalition under his rule of Judea and Israel, then he would have to consolidate all these various tribes. So any death that would occur would be somewhat problematic. So there was two sides of the story there. So that's where we're picking up. Now for David to continue to consolidate his kingdom, there is Ishbaal, who is sort of in the way of things because he has a royal lineage as well. And so we're going to start with how Ishbaal is assassinated. Father Gary, could you just move the mouse a little bit? I think there's an arrow there, right? Where bad is or had, or maybe it's on the. Yeah. Oh, it's the laptop here. Yeah, it looks like there's a fly crawling across it. Maybe it is a fly. So when Saul's son Ishbaal heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his hands grew weak. So when I read that, I thought, well, maybe he was shaking his hands out of nervousness. But really, what this means is this was a in-period idiom that translates to his courage failed. This dismayed the entire country of Israel. They began looking for an alternative since the Philistines could attack at any moment. The only other living relative of Saul was Jonathan's son, Boshibetheth, Biffy guy, the child, James Bond. The child was 5 when the news of Jonathan's death came to his caretakers. His nanny tried to hurry him to safety, fleeing ahead of the invading Philistines. In their haste, M slipped from her arms and on some stairs and tumbled down and injured his back. She must have felt awful about that. Though he survived, he was not a candidate to become king, a warrior king, because he could no longer walk without a crutch. So he would be handicapped in modern terms. Under Abner, the chain of command were 2 captains, one named Baalnal and one named Rechab. Oh, okay. Sounds like German. Rechab. These 2 took matters into their own hands. They entered the palace at the heat of the day when the king Ishbaal would be napping. And Mary wonders if Ishbaal hadn't retreated to his bed in a state of depression after what happened to the child. They went into Ishbaal's bedroom and killed him. They took evidence of what they had done and traveled through the day and night to David in Hebron. In David's throne room, they announced, "Your enemy who sought your life is dead. The Lord has avenged you for taking the life of Saul's offspring." Do you remember that David had sworn to Jonathan that he would spare the lives of Jonathan's family? So because of this, David became very angry, probably opposite of what the 2 assassins had wanted. David said, "The one who told me that Saul was dead thought he was bringing good news to me. It is not. I had him killed in Ziklag. That was his reward." Clearly, David did not want Ishbaal to die either. And David goes on to say, "Now how shall I not require your blood for killing Saul's heir in his own bed?" And thus David had them killed in punishment. Again, David saw to it that Ishbaal was properly and honorably buried? Then all the tribes of Israel said, even when Saul was king, it was David who was our real shepherd. We want David to rule us now. David was anointed king over Israel, now with Ishmael out of the way, and because of David's reaction to his death. David was 30 years old when he began his rule in Israel, and he reigned for 40 years over Judah and 33 over Israel. So now we'll step back and think about why was it important that David punish and or dishonor the people who wanted to hand him the kingdom through violence? These were the two assassins. Why would he feel he needed to punish those two assassins?
It looked like he was a just king.
Yeah, and perhaps, and that would feed into the narrative of him consolidating power. David's kingdom is nonetheless sullied by the violence of others, as in our nation. From within his sin-stained nation, what offers David and his people hope? What offers us hope? So here's the connection to modern times. So what do you think Mary is thinking about there with that question? January 6th? Could that be? I don't know what was in her mind when she said that, but that's what comes to my mind. And what happened on January 6th in 2021? Yeah, the insurrection, right, and the violence.
So the base of that and everything is followed, what offers us hope.
Yeah. Okay, so now Israel, Jerusalem, the city of David. We'll discuss how David finds a site for his capital of the new kingdom, and the continuation of consolidating power, starting with these two nations. Jerusalem is usually identified as the city of Salem, where Abraham met a priest king named Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Who seemed to be worshiping the same deity Abraham worshipped. A Ugaritic text indicates the name Jerusalem may have been derived from a god named Shalom. Is that right? Shalem?
Sure.
In later Israelite times, the origin of Jerusalem was thought to be associated with Hebrew and the word shalom, meaning peace and wholeness. So on to where he's going to build his capital. So David needed a new capital for his newly united nation. That's the two nations of Judah and Israel coming together, Kingdom of Judah and Kingdom of Israel. The capital city should belong neither to one of those two nations, so that David would avoid showing unequal favor to either of them. It also had to be near the former border between the both of them. The border no longer exists because it's a consolidated kingdom. Finally, it needed to be defensible. So where does he find this place? The threshing floor, excuse me. The threshing floor in the foreground of the picture here is Mount Zion. This eventually became the Temple Mount. David chose the city on the second mount, right next to Zion, for his capital. Some say Zion is Mount Moriah, where Isaac was almost killed. So that's a lot of history behind it. Now the stronghold, or the fortified city, was occupied by the Jebusites. They were not a tribe of Jacob, and they were determined to keep their land from David's grasp. However, David knew about a water shaft that had brought water from the spring outside the walls of the city into town. This natural tunnel on this drawing would be the spot upon which the story now turns. This is where the story becomes like a thriller. David had his men dig out the rubble that protected that spring in the shaft. Then David sent men up the water shaft in the middle of the night to attack those who guarded the city gates. Once David's men had taken the city gates, they were opened, and David's men came flooding into the city. And then the city then surrendered. Oh, yes, right. I missed that. Yeah. This is all inferred from these 7 words. Get up the water shaft to attack. This interpretation is backed by a real vulnerability in the Jebusites' defense found by archaeologists in 1863, a blocked tunnel. However, others say that the shaft does not date back that far. Some scholars translate the word water shaft as windpipe, which implies that hitting the Jebusites' throats during the battle won the day. True or not, so that'd be more of a metaphor, right? Poetic metaphor. I like, or Mary likes, the first interpretation over the second because it makes for a better story.
It does. Makes
Yeah,
for a
keep
better
thinking
story.
Games of Thrones. Yeah. Yeah, the pipe bomb. Up to this moment in time, the Ark of the Covenant presented God's. I just want to make sure. Yeah, hold on a second here. Sorry about that. Skip forward quite a bit. How did that happen? Okay. So let's go there. Sorry about that. Back to our normal program. Up to this moment in time, the Ark of the Covenant represented God's presence in Israel and Judah. From this point forward in the Bible, God's presence is seen in David, and this grows stronger and stronger. Saul's family disappears, and soon so does the threat of the Philistines. The future is arriving. Ultimately, the presence of God will be represented by Jerusalem itself. What about the Jebusites? Whatever method David used to get inside the walls, it seems to have left most of them alive. 2 scholars believe that David incorporated them into his kingdom. David needed administrators, managers, merchants, and scribes to launch a nation state. While there may have been similarly qualified people in palaces like Hebron, most of the tribes were made up of rural herders and farmers with little training for this sort of work. The urban Jebusites, whose lives David may have spared, would have sworn loyalty only to David and not also to some tribe or former king. So this speaks to the continual consolidation of David's power. King Hiram of Tyre sent gifts of cedar to David along with carpenters and masons. They built a magnificent house for David in the city of David, also known as Jerusalem. David accepted this gift in the name of his people and gave thanks to the Lord for it. Meanwhile, David collected, probably through treaties, more wives and concubines and produced more sons and daughters.
I think about all of that we saw on display with the Queen's funeral. All of these grandchildren really have absolutely nothing to do with anything. They were just sort of, they'll live their life in comfort, but they don't have, kind of like that great sign or a meme that came up with photo of Charles. I think this came from the Beaverton, which is the Canadian equivalent of the Onion. And it said, 73-year-old man finally gets a job. You think about all these children with all of these many wives and what did they do? Yeah, David's my dad. So what?
The day after her passing, I think the first article or picture I saw was the family tree and the order of accession. And when King Charles III announced in his first speech that he's in there for life, I could just imagine Prince Philip going, darn, because now everybody's going to have to wait, just like he did. Yeah. Now we'll turn to the Philistine defeat. And then this leads to a long period of peace for the kingdom of David. The ark moves to Jerusalem. When the Philistines heard that David was made king of Israel and had united the two kingdoms, they decided to attack to test Israel's new strength. The Philistines sent an army in search of David and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I fight? Will you give them into my hand?" The Lord responded, "Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand." David defeated them at Baal Perazim. The Philistines retreated in such a hurry, they left the statues of their God behind. David's men melted them and divided the gold. Interesting visual of, the monotheism winning over polytheism, right? Using the idols of the polytheistic God. Second time, the Philistines gathered their army at Rephaim. David asked the Lord, and the Lord said, "Do not attack head on, but move your army to their rear," sort of like a flanking maneuver, right? When you hear the sound of marching, you will know that the Lord has struck down the Philistines and they are in retreat. David did just as the Lord instructed and chased the retreating army from Geba to Gezer. Reaching economic and political security of huge consequences for any emerging nation. However, with these goals achieved, there are seductions which David ultimately will not resist. Probably thinking of several of the stories that come later and will be discussed next week. Our leaders also succumb to the same temptations. What is David doing now that holds him on course? And also, would that work as a preventative for our own leaders or for us? So here Mary is trying to make the connection to modern politics or modern life. And so how might we, using David's examples, either confront our temptations and hopefully walk away from them? What do you think?
Well, read the Bible historically, and maybe you'll be a better person today.
Yeah, Mary made that point last week too, that, why are we reading these things? Why do they include them in the Old Testament? And so that's part of it, is that the lessons of history. But as Churchill said, the only thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history. We keep repeating our mistakes. Yeah. Someday.
I think in terms of one of those last questions, what's David doing before the court? At least the way that the biblical historians are telling the story is that he was faithful. If he mess up, he still got some rows to come. But and I think, I don't know, I think that he's got Nathan coming up, who's going to sort of bring his feet to the fire.
It's not God's guidance.
What's that?
It's not God's guidance.
Right. At least, according to the historians, that's right. And, I think it depends on which of our leaders we're referring to as to what their whole stories. And so I don't know.
One apparently considers himself second only to Jesus. The other one, I suspect, doesn't.
I was at a wedding 2 weeks ago, and I was able to have long conversations with family members. And one of the people I reconnected with was my uncle. And he's only 11 years older than me. So I kind of think of him more as a cousin than an uncle. But I asked him, "Who's your favorite president?" And I kind of knew what the answer might be, but I wasn't quite sure. And he said Abraham Lincoln. And so we had long conversations about Abraham Lincoln. But when Lincoln was being tested, he resorted to his faith quite a bit. Yeah. And there's a book that came out a few years ago about all that. It's Lincoln in the Bardo. Are you familiar with it? Lincoln in the Bardo. And it's about how Lincoln dealt with the death of his son in the middle of the Civil War. It was absolutely trying time. And at the same time, he really didn't have a general he can rely on because it was McClellan who was just doing an awful job, you know. Too bad Lee didn't join the Union side. But my Uncle Larry talked a lot about how, where his fortitude came from, because that's what he admired most about Lincoln was his fortitude. Anybody else want to comment? Good.
I just think that names in my mind, I feel like our current president is doing the same. I think that he is trying to stay on course using his faith and trying to be a just leader and trying to include as many people as he can. And the fact that he's been doing that raises such bad press all along, and that it's being, you know, we're emphasizing all of the things that he's done, which he hasn't, from what I've read. He hasn't, you know, he didn't cause the gas prices to go up, you know, stuff like that. But anyway, that, and I don't see how anything but faith can help him try to stay on course in light of all the horrible things that are said about him publicly, and, you know, the way people seem to emphasize failures, so to speak.
That is a really good point, Nadine. You know, sometimes I think, especially lately, last couple of months, how does he get up in the morning? And how does he even think about, you know, running for reelection? And he's what, 70?
79. He'll be 80 when.
79. So, you know, when you just rather retire and enjoy whatever years you have left. And the irony in my mind is that he is not only just a Catholic, but he's a devout Catholic. He goes, you know, he worships every week, yet he doesn't talk about his religion, just like Kennedy probably didn't want. But there's a previous president who was overtly religious, who I wonder even believed in God. He used it for expedient political purposes. So it's just very telling that one man who's tremendously of faith, he uses it for fortitude, and another man uses it for political expediency.
Profess to something that don't practice.
Mm.
And that's where the reading machine, so many young people look and say, why? I mean, all these people who go to church every Sunday and they go out and do this, that, all these things, the young people know are not the right things to do it. And yet, heard people who profess this great piousness, and I'm so much better than you because I go to church on Sunday and I do this, and I do that, and put them down hard, and they go up and do things they see as really not good. For the truth of racism, economically, and all sorts of kind of things. Wasn't there Christian nationalism? Anyway.
That's the last couple of months, I've seen some articles of what Nan's talking about. Most recently, I think it was in the Atlantic, how the denominations within the Southern Baptist Coalition are having a crisis because a lot of their ministers are leaving the service because they're tired of the fission that's in their parish, of dealing with both sides. And also of this, you know, why have we grabbed on the coattails of someone who obviously is a unrepentant sinner? So they're going through all these personal struggles. And then a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago, New York Times had a op-ed piece about in the Episcopal faith, how they're losing their rectors because of not just the political aspects you talk about, but just trying to get to COVID, all the things we had to do. I didn't send that to you because I figured you had enough on your plate. I thought, no, I should spare you that. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah, I'm sure that colleagues talk amongst each other. Yeah, but it's hard times. I mean, it's really hard times for people that lead the church.
I have one colleague who loves sending kind of these reams of lesson articles to their clergy Facebook page. And I think, what, you think we don't already know this? Geez, why are you sending this out?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
You're already lower time, so you have our time.
Yeah.
I don't, so anyway, I just, whatever.
Yes, yeah. But for some of us that are on the other side of the pew, it's for me, I felt it important to learn about this, that our church leadership is really at a stress point right now. We're out of the COVID pandemic era, but there's still the aftermath of all that, and then with other stuff going on. But
it's a lot of parallel teachers.
yes, right, yeah.
How, there's that question, what can we do as people in the pews, as people, parents, and whatever, how can we support our leaders
Mhm.
through these tough times too?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, my daughter's an elementary school teacher, and we talked a lot about that last week. And some parents help a lot, and some parents are drama mamas. They make things worse. Okay, so on to David moves the ark to Jerusalem. David gathered the representatives of the men of Israel, 30,000 of them. He set out with them to Baal Judah, also called, I'm going to try it. Thank you. Where the Ark of the Covenant had stayed since the Philistines returned to Israel in the days of the prophet Eli. Abdad, at whose house the ark had stayed for 20 years, placed the ark in the cart, and his two sons, Uzzah and Ahio, oh yeah, it would be right. Ohio, who were Levites and priests, handled the cart and the ark. David and all of Israel were dancing before the Lord and the cart with all their might. People were playing the lyre, harp, and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. When they neared the threshing floor at Nikon, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark as the oxen had shaken it. So he had very good intentions. He was trying to prevent it from falling over. But the Bible says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah. God struck him dead because he had touched the ark. Uzzah died. He wasn't doing anything disrespectful. Instead, he was trying to help. Now it was only the Levites who were supposed to manage the ark, and perhaps he was not one. What are we supposed to make of this? Overexertion resulting in a heart attack, or God indicating that God didn't want to align God's self too closely with the throne. Yeah, this story doesn't sit well with me.
In Luke, so.
Yes, that's right. Well, but it seemed like Uzzah was innocent. I don't know. It would have been a shame for the ark to have tipped over.
Can you go back a few slides?
Yes. Let's go here. Yeah. Yeah.
Keep going. Okay, so Abinadab had
Abinadab.
the ark in his house. And his two sons, Uzzah and Ahio, who were Levites.
Oh, right.
So that was what I'm wondering if I remembered that. So I don't think that it's connected back to birth order, at least in those prospective ideas as to why this happened to him, that it wasn't because he was a Levite. But my suspicion is, why you don't think God can take care of God's ark? You know?
Oh, they didn't have enough faith?
Picture, because he's shouting at Pio, and yet it's Uzzah that dies. So why is Pio on the floor? The fact it's, you know, like,
Maybe he got kicked over by the oxen.
Yeah. Why are they Lego men? All sorts of questions. All right. So let me pick up. David was angry because the Lord had killed Uzzah, but David was also afraid. David prayed, "How can the ark come into my care?" However, David was unwilling to move the ark any further. Instead, David took the ark to the houses of Obed-Edom, and there it remained for 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his family and servants with prosperity.
I have a question. Do we know why he wasn't willing to move the ark any further?
I can't remember if there's anything other than the fact that, he just kind of, I don't want this for my life.
Right, yes. Fear that, yeah, something like that may happen again. When David heard how blessed Obed-Edom and his family had been, David felt it was safe to move the ark to the city of David. Canary in the coal mine, I think.
Yeah.
So David began the procession and dancing again. However, this time, before he had gone 6 steps, he stopped and sacrificed an ox and a calf to the Lord, probably to make sure God would be on David's side.
progressive insurance.
Yeah, right. Yes. David again danced before the Lord in all his might, girded only with a tunic. All the people of Israel, Judah included, brought up the ark with shouting and the sound of the trumpet. As the ark came into Jerusalem, Michal, remember that was his first wife or first love, looked out of her window and saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord. She despised him in all her heart. They brought the ark and set it in its place inside the tent of the tabernacle. David helped to erect that tent. David offered a burnt offering and offerings of well-being. David, in the name of the Lord of hosts, blessed his people, and gave them gifts of food, cake, bread, meat, and raisins. There was a point in Saul's career when he made an offering and was chastised by Samuel for taking over the role of the priest. Mary is sure that he had the assistance of the priest with the offering, but blessing the people seems to cross a boundary. The people dispersed in their homes, and David came to his household, intended to bless it as well. Michal came out to greet him. She was furious with him and ashamed of him. He had danced so wildly before his people, wearing only a tunic, not his robes or crown or symbols of his kingship. Looks like Monster on the Muppets. Michal said that he looked vulgar and foolish, and David responded, "I did this before the Lord, the one who gave me your father's crown. I did abase myself, made myself look like a fool, But I assure you, the people know I was being humble before the Lord. They will honor me for that. God apparently agreed with David because Michal never became pregnant. She had no child to the day of her death. David's need to get the ark to Jerusalem may not have been purely religious. When a person is rising in power as a king, he or she must be sure that the sources of power can be managed to the advantage of the throne. One huge source of such power is religious authority. Religious leaders in David's time would be easier to regulate if David controlled the land beneath their feet. So he's being politically astute. Right now in America, the people who control one body of religious thought have mustered a voting bloc that is capable of enacting some of its agenda. How can this be modified to be more inclusive of the other goals supported by people of different religious thought or no religion at all? What opens people's minds when it comes to what they believe God wants?
I think when it affects them personally, I
Ah,
think of people who were, very much against gay marriage until they had a gay child,
mhm.
and all of a sudden they changed their tune.
Yeah,
Sometimes,
sometimes. Or sometimes it takes time, like with Liz Cheney and her sister, right? She initially said, "Ah," and then years later, she finally said, okay, I get it. Yeah. What else might we do? What could we do to be more inclusive?
My thinking is along the lines, lays there, because we talked about confirmation bias, so it's hard to past some of this stuff.
Yeah.
This was the vote.
Hmm.
Arguments aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
Just to see where it's due for the connection that you can make out of your life with something. That's where this is going to happen. And maybe a point of cognitive dissonance when you say, well, this is what I think, and this is what I'm seeing, and those two don't match. So, but we're not going to argue anybody.
It's an inquiry process almost. And that as more and more people begin to accept people who are unlike themselves in religion, in sexual orientation, or race, or whatever, and they widen their circle of friends, then that circle of friends makes more friends, and so it just sort of gradually builds. But it's a matter of, you have to know someone pretty much to get to be accommodating of someone who's different from yourself in some other way to understand what they're all about. And until you have that contact, you just really can't understand where someone else is coming from, because you don't, they're just other.
And so I think that's part of the goal, or the underlying goal of this smaller faction in our country who's trying to take over by keeping everybody just underinformed or separate. For example, I was reading articles about book bannings and all of these groups. Oh my gosh, 500, and who were going, who all over the country banning books, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, and then you just keep these people separated.
But connection is the answer. And I don't know what the answer is to the lack of connection, other than, read every bad book there is. But I remember some years back when there was talk of a Muslim ban and a registry. I teach a bunch of Muslim kids, and I said to one of the moms, if this comes to be, I'll be knocking at your door to borrow a headscarf, and I'm gonna put the biggest crucifix on my phone and go register a Muslim. He said, we have to do the right thing. This is not okay. And, there's got to come to that, but the solidarity with other human beings can only happen when we get to know them as people as opposed to others. And That's what we need to figure out how to do, not how to do it.
Well, the real crack in Barbara, I think, we get the school. And children begin to get to know other children of other races you can see that because I went through that when I was in school. And all of a sudden, there was a group in our midst who were very unlike us in many ways. Their experiences have been totally different. Their education has been totally different. They were so far behind the rest of the class just because of what they had been allowed to experience. It's just a huge difference. And it's amazing how well they caught up, how quickly they caught up. Just because of, again, the exposure and the cross.
And the connection. Yeah, like you were speaking about earlier. Yeah.
Because we each rubbed off on the other.
Yeah, it starts with, as you were saying, it starts with first having the connection of being in the same space. And unfortunately, I think young kids have the gift of having honest conversations more than maybe adults do.
Right.
In my own family, I have somebody who espouses conspiracy theories. And like you were saying, I made the mistake of trying to discuss that with him with facts. And that's the worst thing you could do because that only reinforces the conspiracy theory. So I've learned to just keep my opinion to myself. But that's not childlike. I mean, a child would be honest. They just start having these conversations and all. Yeah. The other thing that's kind of related to this is I was reading this morning that what are we going to do about ensuring election security? How there's all sorts of things happening at the grassroots. And who was it? Brannon, who was one of Trump's chief of staff. Brannon, is that his name? Trying to remember him, but he runs this podcast, and he was convincing his viewers and listeners that you need to be involved in grassroots. And one of the ways you could do that is to volunteer, register, or apply for these positions in the electoral process. So there's people that watch the polling areas, for security. There's people that check people in as they're coming in for a vote. And I thought, he's actually got a very good idea. And that's something I got to look into personally, is that, can we somehow be involved in the election process? I know you're thinking about doing that.
Well, I won't go into it, but I was a poll watcher.
Yeah, a poll watcher, right.
Election. So, yeah, if nothing else, it gives you, to me, or gave me a greater sense of, not power, but, I was encouraged, and certainly don't believe anything, I didn't anyway, but in no way, shape, or form could there be corruption at the local levels in our elections, because there are so many checks and balances, and people from both sides of these watching. But then Donna talked about being a poll watcher in Arapahoe County and how she was basically threatened. There weren't other Democrats, I think she said, where she was at, and there were lots of Republicans, and they were very threatening.
Yeah, so that's what went through my mind this morning, is that if I do this, you have to join a committee, because that's how it gets, the procedures are promulgated. And so how are the, other people in Douglas County, that is, are going to look at me, right? So am I going to be the only one at the table that?
Well, it's so strange. Colorado is so different because it's all vote by name. So poll watching is so different
Yeah,
here than
yeah.
it would be in a state where, you're going down the corner to school, and like we used to do.
Yeah,
Going in and voting for somebody's garage.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that works in Colorado.
Well,
Not saying it doesn't, just
yeah, no, the voting by mail is almost an antidote to this. Yeah, and so maybe that's why some people find it threatening. Yeah. Vote for David. David's wars. David's sword creates an empire, actually builds upon one. One way in which Israel achieved greatness during David's reign was that Israel dominated neighboring countries in battle. As countries were conquered, they paid tribute to the King David and agreed as part of their peace treaties to fight with David's army should the need arise. These smaller kingdoms usually paid tribute to some great power like Egypt or an empire of Mesopotamia. In David's time, however, both Egypt and the city-states in Mesopotamia were fighting each other in civil wars, and neither had soldiers to spare for conquering or controlling the smaller nations in the Philistine territory. Even the Greeks were infighting and could spare no aid for the Philistine cousins. David subdued the Philistines and took much of Israel's traditional territory back. David defeated the Moabites. This was predicted by Bahalik and the man with the talking donkey. Forgot that story. This was the land from which Ruth, David's great grandmother, had come. David fought the Arameans in the land we now call Syria and put garrisons among them. They paid tribute. David brought home to the Jerusalem gold shields and bronze armor and chariots from this war. Another king, the king of Amaramites, who had often fought against Syria, now made an alliance with David. This king brought gold, silver, and bronze as gifts to seal their agreement. So now David had become world famous when he defeated the Edomite in the Salt Valley. 18,000 men in the army of Edom died. David placed the garrisons among them, and Esau founded the Edomites. The domination of the kingdom by David fulfilled a promise that God made to Rebekah. When Jacob and Esau were still in Rebekah's womb, they tumbled as though fighting. Rebekah complained to God. God said that they would fight, but the younger, the house of Jacob, would eventually win. The house of Esau, the Edomites, would have ultimately served the house of Jacob, also known as Israel. Wrap up. Okay, good. I'll let her know for next week. We're going to turn to, after the consolidation of power through all these wars, now David needs to build a administration in order to run this large expanded empire. A lot like what Europe goes through when they're consolidating government. They need to appoint the technocrats to actually keep government going as leaders move in and out with elections.
This Middle East area has been under so much conflict.
Yes.
Throughout.
Yeah.
And